Good morning, everyone. I'm Jill Flessing. I serve as the chair of the Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. I asked the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. The first two members are not going to be present today, Denise Sisman and Christina Boyd. So Lisa Carter,
Present.
Jason Griever, Chad Jacobs,
Here.
Mike James,
Present.
Charity Cosson,
Here.
Crystal Norman,
Present.
Dulcinea Rakestraw,
Here.
Judy Reeser, said she may join us later, and Zenova Williams.
Present.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye
Here.
and Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
All right. Thank you, Jill. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or the COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the COMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On December 10th, 2025, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Okay. I also noticed that Jason Griever joined us. Thank you, by the way. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the next item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is the agenda approval. The agenda was included in your packet that David sent out yesterday. If everyone's had a chance to review it, I'd ask for a motion that the agenda be approved, or if there's any additional discussion or additions, please let us know.
I move that we approve the agenda.
I second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The agenda has been approved. The next item on the agenda is review and approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which is all the way back in September. Thank you all for your flexibility in rescheduling this meeting. I appreciate that. Again, the draft minutes are included in the packet if you've had a chance to look them over. Are there any additions or thoughts about the draft meeting minutes? And if not, would someone make a motion to approve them?
You said the minutes are in the packet that was sent yesterday?
Yes.
It was in a separate email. I sent the original documents earlier in the day around 4:30 or so, and then later I sent an additional document with had the minutes attached. So.
Okay. I misspoke. It was in a separate email.
The Thursday, September 11th meeting minutes.
Yes.
I motion to approve them.
I'll second.
There has been a motion. It has been seconded to approve the meeting minutes. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. The minutes from the September 11th meeting have been approved. The next item on the agenda is an executive director report from David.
All right, thank you, Jill. We'll start with some BSRB operations updates, go to some legislative items, and then provide some general updates. First, starting with BSRB operations, I believe almost all the members of the advisory committee have completed the annual training. Since the last time we met, we went ahead and tried a new process this year for the annual training to have that as an on-demand training. So appreciate all of you that have gone ahead and reviewed the training. We'll probably try to do that again next year. I think we've had a fair amount of success with that. But if you do have any questions, that is one of the drawbacks of an on-demand training. You can't really take live questions, but if you do have questions about anything that was covered in the training, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. I'm always happy to go more in depth into any of those topics, like the Kansas Open Meetings Act, Open Records Act, or responsibilities as an advisory committee member. I do want to remind everyone again about CE Broker. I'll probably just have a steady reminder. That's a free service that the board was able to obtain for licensees just about a year ago. We were able to implement that for all 7 professions, and through an agreement the board has with CE Broker, we are able to offer free accounts with CE Broker for individuals to upload their documentation when they complete continuing education. And why that's helpful is that if someone is selected for audit when they renew their license, we can, if they're using the CE Broker account and they've uploaded their documentation, we can log into that portal, verify the transcripts, and then approve their audit very quickly. You can still do the traditional method. There's no requirement to use CE Broker, but I do encourage people to give it a try, and I think people will be happy with that free service. And we do audit 10% of our licensees. So if you are selected for that process, please let me know a little bit of feedback. So far, we've heard mostly positive comments. But we will continue to encourage people to use CE Broker as a free resource. We are in the process of moving forward to implement a background check for all licensees. This would be something for new applicants for licensure, and there would also be a method for current applicants to opt in if they would want to undergo a background check. Part of the reason for that is for a number of the professions, they've recently passed multi-state compacts. And one of the criteria to practice under those compacts is a requirement of a background check, something that the BSRB has not had in place. And a lot of other states didn't have a background check in place for licensure either. But these compacts, that is one of the new requirements that seems to be a consistent factor. And so we are working to implement that for all professions. Again, it wouldn't include everyone who's currently licensed. It would be for new applicants as of the date that we are able to implement that. And then it would be for individuals to opt in if they chose to do so, but we'll have more details on that. We've been working with our licensing host to basically build into our licensing system a way to keep track of who all has had a background check and whether that came back without any issues. And then we've also been working with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation to get an MOA for them to be able to process those background checks for us, for them to be able to train our staff on how to access that information, the confidentiality involved. So there's a lot of different steps that go into that. We've also submitted some regulatory changes to authorize us to basically have a fee in place for that background check process for the professional counseling compact, and we'll have similar items for that when the social work compact comes up to go active, I expect later this year. So just want to let you know that that is something that's in the works. There'll probably be more information on the background check process here maybe in the next month or two. And then in terms of another major operation update, we've been working on finalizing those draft survey reports that we had put out last year. We surveyed all 7 professions, which meant surveying close to 16,500 people at the time. And so that was a lot of data. We made separate reports for each profession. We've been going through the process of cleaning those reports up to essentially make them final reports. One of the most recent changes that we've been working on behind the scenes has been essentially to add a table of contents where there's an index for each survey question per report, an executive summary for a short summary of the findings, and then in the back of those reports before the appendices, having a section that deals with conclusions and recommendations. So I think once those are finalized, we'll let everyone know that they are published on the BSRB website, and then we'll also send out a message to thank everyone who was so generous with their time to provide all that feedback in the survey responses. In terms of some legislative updates, the 2026 legislative session has officially started. Every spring, the legislature meets for about 90 days and takes part in holding committee meetings in which they have presentations for informational purposes or bill hearings. There are certain committees that are dedicated to the budgetary function of the state. And so every state agency each year proposes a revised budget or a budget estimate for the state. Traditionally, in years past, those have been reviewed by representatives from the Division of Budget under the governor's office, as well as the Legislative Research Department under the legislature. And then when the legislative session starts, the governor makes the State of the State address. The following morning, the governor's budget recommendation is released. And in years past, that has been the starting point for the budgetary process during the session. However, the law does not say the legislature must follow the governor's recommendation. And last year, the legislature did try a different approach. They started having some interim budget meetings in the fall of 2024, and they came out with their own budget bill. And so this year, it appears that they are following a similar path. So there were some interim budget committee meetings that met in the fall. And last week, the week before session even started, they had approved a handful of budget committees to meet and review the budgets of mostly smaller agencies like the BSRB. When these dates were approved by the Legislating Coordinating Council, what was said publicly during that meeting was they wanted to approve those days to get a jump start on the budget process so that more time could be dedicated during the session to the review of the larger budgets, the ones that receive a significant amount of money from the State General Fund. So I presented testimony last week to the House Higher Education Budget Committee on January 6th. The Board of Healing Arts budget was after our budget, and then a handful of others were heard that day. They did not make any recommendations, in part, I think, because if you make recommendations before the session starts, those are treated a little bit differently. Those are basically recommendations from interim committee versus recommendations for a budget committee during the legislative session. So they held the budget hearings, and then sometime this week, I expect them to make recommendations on the budget. Just to let all of you know, we didn't ask for any additional money beyond what was approved by last year's legislature. So the 2025 legislature approved a budget for the BSRB for fiscal year 25, 26, and 27. The legislature does not provide any funding to small fee-funded agencies like the BSRB. We operate based on the licensure fees that we receive, but every year we propose a budget. We go in front of the legislature and they set a yearly limit on how much we can spend from our available resources. So the amount that we had provided last year was approved. And then this year, there is one small technical correction in fiscal year 27 for all state agencies that had 2 budget years last year, and that is just to maintain a salary increase for state employees that the 2025 legislature put in. Kind of a weird quirk in the budgetary system, but they put the money in for 1 year for everyone, but not for the second year. So this just makes sure that that is maintained across both years. But with the exception of that technical adjustment, there's no real further change. There were some internal adjustments, but what this means for all of you and licensees and applicants is that there's no need for us to consider readjusting our fees in terms of fee increases because our budget did not go up. So that is good news. And also, we presented information to the budget committee that our one fund, the BSRB fee fund, the balance in that fund has been as high as about $2.1 or $2.2 million. Our yearly budget as an agency is about $1.2 million. And so there were some fee decreases put in by the board in previous years. And we presented information that showed that over the last 4 years, the balance in the BSRB fee fund has gone down steadily each year, and that is by design. The board had implemented some fee decreases knowing that the balance would decrease. But basically the goal, based on some of those legislative comments that I've heard in budget committees, has been to get the fee fund balance down to about 1 year of operating expenditures. So as I mentioned, it was as high as about $2.2 million. That has gone down a little over $100,000 each year. So now it sits about 1.7 something million dollars. So that's the current budget. It's about 1.5 our yearly budget. So I think that's a pretty good ratio right now. But in addition, the board had been pursuing some fee decreases for all licensees as a way to draw the ending balance down a little bit more. And so those are in the process of being reviewed by the Department of Administration, and then the Attorney General's office will review those. But those have been all submitted. Those would decrease the original license fee for a lot of applicants. And so I'll let you know when those are going to be out there for public comment. But it's estimated that those additional fee decreases would reduce the yearly revenue for the BSRB by about $75,000 per year. So we're not trying to make the balance go down too quickly so that we would need to raise fees, but we want to draw it down to about a 1 year target, and we are on pace for that to happen. I don't have a firm date on when the budget recommendations for the BSRB will occur, but based on the legislative calendar, there is an item scheduled for the agenda for both Wednesday and Thursday that says recommendations on budgets previously heard. So I believe that is likely to be the budgets that were heard last week. So I'll be ready to attend those meetings either tomorrow or Thursday, and then I can report back what the House decides. Ultimately, what happens with the Budget Committee is they make a recommendation. That recommendation is forwarded to the House Appropriations Committee. They review that, and then if they confirm that recommendation, then that goes into the House versions of the appropriation bill. And then what traditionally happens is the Senate takes a similar process, either at the same time as the House is, or last year, the Senate waited until the House finished all of their budgets and passed a budget bill, and then the Senate decided to hear certain budgets after that. So we will be just waiting to hear sort of what the process will be this year, but we'll be responsive in that way. In terms of other legislative items, I did want to make you aware of a bill that I became aware of yesterday morning. It is a pre-filed bill in front of the legislature. If you're not familiar with the legislative process in terms of how the sessions work, usually these are 2-year sessions, and bills that are introduced last year, if they were not heard or if they were maybe in an exempt committee, then some of those bills are still eligible to be worked this year. So you do have some carry forward bills from last year that may be available for the legislators to consider. You also have some new bills that could be introduced this year. So House Bill, I believe it's 2420, is a bill that would require parental consent prior to a student receiving mental health services in a school setting. It's a fairly short bill. It's about 2 pages long, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. I'll try to keep an eye on any bills that involve mental health or behavioral health and keep you updated on those. But I wanted to call out that bill. Again, that's House Bill 2420. And if you go to the legislature's website, you can pull up a version of that bill just through looking at the list of bills in the House. There has been some discussion over the last year about whether the BSRB would want to introduce a bill this year, and the board met yesterday and had some additional discussion on that topic. I think there are some things the board would like to move forward on, but I think given what we are hearing in terms of the fast pace of the legislative session this year and some other factors, what the board decided to do was to not introduce legislation this year, but instead to take some of the items the board would like to work on, and then also take a lot of the information from the surveys and see if we can add some additional items and then potentially consider a bill next session, or to see if some of these issues can be addressed in other ways, maybe through regulatory changes. So I don't anticipate there being a bill introduced by the BSRB this year, but if there are bills that are introduced that would relate to the BSRB, we'll definitely make the board aware of that and see if the board would like to present testimony on those items. Concerning some other items, I did want to make you aware of just some updates from the most recent board meetings. Since your last meeting on September 11th, the board has met 3 different times. The board met for the annual in-person meeting that was in Manhattan, Kansas on September 29th. At that meeting, we provided an update on licensing and other BSRB operations. Happy to report that overall, across the BSRB, licensing does continue to increase, even with the introduction of multi-state compacts. We are very close to going over 17,000 total licensees, and that is a huge number. Back about 10 years ago, the number of individual licenses overseen by the board was about 12,500. So just in the last 10 years, it's gone up from about 12,500 individuals licensed to about 17,000. So that's a tremendous growth, and we're really happy to see the fields growing with that. The board talked a little bit more about operations, and there was some discussion about the future of the BSRB. The board decided over the next year to dedicate some time at board meetings to developing a strategic plan for the BSRB. And so at board meetings coming up this year, the board will be talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, looking at the mission and core values, developing some goals and objectives, and looking at sort of a multi-year plan for the agency. So really excited about being part of that process. The board also talked a little bit about the investigation and disciplinary process for the board. There were some interim committees that dealt with some other agencies that looked at their processes, and I think the board wanted to review our own processes. If you're curious about those are posted on our website under resources, policies, and there's an investigation and disciplinary process that's been posted on the board's website for a number of years. And the board reviewed those and felt that most of the items in there still were very good policies to keep in place. One item that was changed is that the board has a subset of board members that serve on the complaint review committee, and they review unprofessional conduct type complaints against licensees and the reports from our investigators. And so there have historically been 5 members of the board's complaint review committee, and there was an interest in adding an additional member. That number of 5 individuals has been in place prior to the board adding addiction counseling and also behavior analysis. And so the board decided to add a 6th member to the CRC. And so at the following meeting, which took place on November 10th, the board did appoint a 6th member to the complaint review committee, and that is the board chair, David Anderson, from the master's level psychology profession. There was also some additional work by the board at that November 10th meeting in terms of reviewing the unprofessional conduct regulations for all the professions. At our most recent board meetings, the board has been going through a large grid of all the unprofessional conduct regulations with similar items side by side so that the board can see the language and how it differs by profession to see if there can be some standardization in having items for all 7 professions, or if there's reasons why certain professions should have some unique language. Additionally, at that November 10th meeting, the board recognized me for 5 years of service as executive director for the BSRB. I came into this role as executive director back in November of 2020, so it's been 5 years. And we spent a little bit of time at that meeting just talking about all the different changes for the agency in the past 5 years, including movement in the licensing system, the website, a lot of our internal processes, a lot of the legislation that we were able to have enacted, and some of the really positive changes that have taken place. And we also talked about some of the things that we're still working on and some of our long-term goals. And so really happy to have been here in this role for 5 years and really excited about the future to come. And then at the most recent board meeting, the board met yesterday on Monday, January 12th. The board continued to work on that unprofessional conduct grid and trying to find standardization across professions. Additionally, we've had each of the advisory committees go through a number of their regulations to make sure that those are consistent with bills that have passed in the last few years. Also, if there's any outdated language that needs to be cleaned up, or if there's a regulation that may not have a specific purpose, that maybe it was good for a certain length of time, and now it's appropriate for that to be struck by the board. And so we've been doing this with each of the advisory committees, and the board went through several different regulations that were recommended by the advisory committees and approved those to be moved forward for review by the Department of Administration as well as the Attorney General's office. when those are ready for public review, we will let you know. We'll publish a notice in the Kansas Register. We'll also put information out on our website so that anyone can comment if they have comments on those different items. And on your agenda, you will see some regulations up for review as well. We also had the board had a discussion about the board's posting policy in terms of disciplinary actions on the board's website. So if you are not familiar with that policy, there is a policy on the board's website that talks about why the board posts disciplinary action. When someone receives a complaint against them, the BSRB is charged to investigate those complaints and to take action if it's appropriate to do so, if the board finds that there was a violation and what the appropriate remedy would be. But there's also the public protection mission of the board in terms of making sure the public is aware of those disciplinary actions. So we do report those to the National Practitioner Data Bank, but also separately, we post those to the board's website. And that is consistent with a lot of other similar boards that do what we do in different states. And so we have those orders that are posted. There was a question about whether the board would want to continue to post those orders or if they had been satisfied, if it was just sufficient to post a notice that there had been disciplinary action, but not the specific order of what occurred. And the board yesterday revisited that topic and decided that in the interest of public protection, it was still relevant for those orders to be posted so the public could be aware of what the past disciplinary actions had been. And then could weigh them accordingly. So no change to the policy, but that was revisited by the board. So with that, I will go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions about operations, legislative items, or any items from the board meetings or any other topic that you would like to ask about.
Thank you, David. Anyone have thoughts, questions?
I
did
just
have a
want to
quick question.
congratulate David on 5 years
Yes.
with the BSRB and to thank you for your service to the state and to the professions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I also wanted to congratulate you as well. I did have a question. I remember maybe last time or last year around this time, we were talking about the temporary licenses, and I didn't know if we had a follow-up about that or any information about the temporary licensures and how they were going to change.
So I think you mean as far as expanding the student temporary licenses?
Yes, the student temporary license, sorry. Student temporary.
Yeah, so most of that is in statute, and so we can't really expand them exactly how we were looking at before in terms of what would need to go into a bill unless there is legislation. So I think in terms of the recommendation to expand it to include some additional individuals, that'll have to be an item that we either try to see if that can be addressed in a different way, maybe through definitions, or we will have to wait to see in a future year if the board would like to introduce legislation on that item.
Any other questions?
Yeah, but thank you for your comments. It's interesting, in some ways, the last 5 years there have been so many changes, but also part of it too, in November of 2020, that was really during some of the beginning stages of the pandemic, and so it's been nice to see things change over the years in certain ways, and I've really enjoyed working with all the board members and my staff and all of you as advisory committee members. It's been really neat to see the advisory committees grow and to see how active you all have been, and really appreciate all your time and all the work you put forward as far as recommendations on changes and good policies, because a lot of those have gone into the things we've either been able to get through statutory changes or regulatory changes. So.
Okay, thank you very much, David. All right, the next item on the agenda is a brief summary report that David and I were able to attend the NADAC National Convention in Seattle in October. I had never attended an addictions counselor conference of such a large scale. So it was an interesting experience. The theme of the conference was unity and connection, and maybe not unity, but connection with other people. And it very much, my experience, I found it difficult to not look at it from a clinician lens, because that's what I do. but we attended with the idea of seeing what people in other states do, both legislatively, clinically, getting some experience with other states. And if anything, the conference really illustrated how the lack of unity in the addictions counseling profession was really on display from states that have licensure, like Kansas, states that do credentialing, states that have other ways of um, making sure that addictions counseling providers are organized. There was a wide variety within, I believe it was Montana, folks that have an associate's degree and folks that have a PhD have the same practice privileges. A lot of different ways of vetting folks. I attended some breakout sessions that I found very interesting clinically. One about the legality of deltas, THC deltas versus CBD and synthetic THC products. That was interesting. I also attended a session about gambling and problematic gambling, which now sports betting is legal in Kansas and in Missouri. And it was interesting that the presenter talked a lot about being able to identify if someone has a problem or difficulty with gambling, but treatment options seemed very, very limited, if any. So that was something that was concerning and not surprising to me, but was something else I was going to note that I have forgotten. I'll come back to it if I remember. But it was an interesting experience. And the NADAC conference next year, or this year, actually this calendar year, will be in Kansas City. So it will be right in our backyard. And I know David had some thoughts about his experience as a non-clinical person, looking at it from looking at the conference from a regulatory perspective, from a legislative perspective, and he has more information about a request for proposals that the NADAC organizers sent out for the conference in the fall for Kansas City.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. So the first time that I've attended the NADAC conference as well, and I found it really interesting. So when I talk to individuals from other states, I basically say the BSRB is 7 agencies in one because we regulate 7 mental health or behavioral health professions. But when you look at some of the other professions, the standardization of the scope of practice and what is necessary, to become licensed, is a lot different than the addiction counseling profession because of states having different models. Some states having licensure, some states having registration, certification, the terminology, the scope of practice. It's just so different. And so, but I do think that for us to do our due diligence for all the professions we regulate, it's important for us to be knowledgeable about what's going on at the national level, to try to reach out to individual representatives from different states to see if we can learn, kind of what experiences they have had so that we can be prepared for those things to come here and be part of that conversation. And also to learn from best practices from different states. I think one of the things that has been really beneficial in my role as executive director for some of the other professions is attending some of the meetings for the Social Work Regulatory Board Association or the Psychology Regulatory Board Association, and being able to talk to peers from other states and hearing them talk about a solution that they built or maybe a problem they experienced and then what they did in response to it. And so I would like us to have peer states in terms of addiction counseling as well, so that we can, make sure that when things do come to Kansas, we are knowledgeable about those and we can handle those appropriately. I attended several sessions on some of the history of the addiction counseling profession. And I thought that was very helpful for me. I'm not someone who's been specifically educated in any of the professions for the BSRB. My background is in other areas, and what some of the expertise that I bring to this area is as an attorney. And so, in terms of the wording and representation and the ability to do certain things, those skills have come in handy. But I really have tried to make it a priority to learn about the different professions that the board regulates. And so it's important for me to understand the history, what's going on in different places, and then be able to respond in an appropriate way when we have questions here at the state level. So I thought there was a good opportunity to make connections with individuals from different states. I do feel like there is probably a little bit of a gap at the national level, and there's an opportunity here for us to build some connections with some other states. And even if they have slightly different models, we can still kind of learn about what are the successful things they're doing in those states. And as Jill mentioned, the upcoming NADAC conference in 2026 is going to be in Kansas City. So basically our backyard, that's going to be August 29th through the 31st. One of the sessions that I attended at the NADAC conference talked a little bit about the NADAC Code of Ethics. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of hear a little bit about how that might compare to what we have here in Kansas for licensure, the unprofessional conduct regulations. And there were a couple of comments that they made during the presentation that struck me in a certain way, because it sounded like to some practitioners, they were struggling a little bit in terms of knowing how to navigate when the Code of Ethics says this, but the state may say this, whether it's unprofessional conduct regulations or whatever the state practice, code is. And so the response from NADAC was, well, you should just go to the highest level and meet those standards, which, I see the benefit from that perspective. But I do think it's important for practitioners to really understand the distinction. One is about membership in a professional association, and then the other is really what your state requires for you to be able to practice and earn a living in those states. And if you have a disciplinary violation with your state, that can really lead to some severe consequences. And so I felt like maybe the voice of state regulatory boards might have been missing a little bit in terms of being able to help practitioners out a little bit. And as Jill mentioned, they have opened up an opportunity for boards to submit different opportunities to present information. And I talked with Jill a little bit. There was a session that talked about ethics, and I thought, well, maybe that's a good opportunity. But in terms of the ethics, I think there could be a little bit of confusion if we went down that road, and there might be some additional things that we would need to have approved to make sure that it would meet certain CE requirements if we went down the ethics path. But alternatively, there was a session that really seemed to be more matching up what we've talked about recently, and that was a call for reports that involved data and data analysis. And I was thinking, we have these survey reports from all of our addiction counselors that we surveyed last year. We have information on workforce. We have information on what practitioners think about things like supervision, telehealth, issues that they have seen in the field. And I thought, as we're looking at finishing these draft reports and adding some conclusions and sort of an analysis of where do we go from here, I thought maybe it'd be a good opportunity for us to submit a proposal that focused on these surveys, and specifically the ones for addiction counseling, and then basically organized our data, and then maybe put that forward as something that we could submit on behalf of the BSRB, or with assistance from the advisory committee, if all of you think that would be a good idea, if there's anyone who might want to volunteer to participate in that. But I wanted to kind of share this as a concept with all of you today. I've been kind of thinking about what could be provided in terms of a submission. The deadline to submit that is this Friday, so it is coming up pretty fast. But I do think that there could be something that is at least submitted from a high level, and then more of the details could be worked through. But I thought I'd mention it all to you today, see if there's even interest, or what the advisory committee might think about that. I'm curious, have any of you attended an ADAC conference in the past? And what are your thoughts on what Jill and I have shared, and also the potential for us to do maybe a presentation at the upcoming conference?
Are you talking about a session presentation, okay. Well, if you haven't ever been to one, it's something else. They have quite a large budget when it comes to bells and whistles, so it's pretty impressive, and the attendance is phenomenal.
Yeah,
you know,
it was a lot of people.
Yeah, I attended a few years ago. I attended the one that was in Colorado. Yeah, it was great. It was a good time. I think those are great things. I would say they definitely what I did see when I was there was that there was a lack of the understanding of even like people with like higher education, as well as like ethics, because there was so many different regulations between states and things like that. It was just like trying to get that on, because I'm coming from Kansas, which is we are very regulated. We also have a
That's right.
highest standard, a very pretty high standard, and all pretty standardized. Um, so people coming to us kind of get the educational requirements at the LMAC level, which is what NADAC needs and things like that, which makes sense. But other states, that doesn't quite align in that way. So it's really kind of confusing. And so like when talking with other people, it was like, oh, you're certified, or and you're like, and I'm like, what is that? I don't know what that I don't, whatever. So, so I think that could definitely be helpful. I think any information that Kansas can provide of like how you do things, I think we may be coming from it like, oh, it just makes sense to us, but I don't think anybody understands it the way we understand it. And just having some clarity of like, hey, this could be helpful in this way. I think Colorado does have some similar kind of thing with their DORA. They have we have BSRB. I think theirs is called DORA, DORA for their regulations. There is a little bit, I think, a little bit more standardized, and there are some that are there regulatory boards that are a bit standardized or better, I guess, with the regulations. But I think that could be helpful. The survey data, or anything that you can present around the regulation, or how things are structured, or how we do those things in Kansas, and how it kind of helps. And maybe even like how that leads into the survey data of how we can get people licensed, and the way we can do the temporary and student temporary, and maybe even like what we think about going forward with things, and how that leads into so much stuff, and how we do the licensings. Um, Also, just as a comment, I also teach ethics, and I teach ethics at the master's level. And one of our actual assignments is to compare and contrast the national NADAC code of ethics with the state. And most of my students come away with, oh, the national is very general, because it is. And the state is specific, and you should be doing the state because that's what your license is in. So hopefully our students come away with that. But again, each state, I don't know what their regulations are, or if that's the assignment, and if also the educational requirements are the same. So maybe that's also where we're missing too, because ours is a very structured thing. Other states, again, like you said, like associates versus PhD, they may have the same requirements, but are their educational backgrounds the same? I don't know. So that may be where they're missing the target nationally, where people aren't necessarily getting the same educational background, I guess. So yeah, those are my thoughts, I guess. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think that the Mid-America ATTC, we may be doing a table there. We'll be talking about that here in the next week or so, either as Region 7, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, or in conjunction with our National Coordinating Office. But I'm happy to assist putting a presentation together, or being on a team of people that present during that session. Just let me know. I mean, that's part of what we do at ATTC, is go around, present, exhibit at conferences, etc. So happy to help.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lisa.
I think the presentation's a great idea. And if there's anything I can do on the back end to assist too, then I'm happy to do that. I was curious, I know that NADAC is looking for a Kansas affiliate, and I'm wondering if you guys heard anything about that at the conference, if there's been any movement with that for them.
I hadn't really heard about that.
Neither. You said affiliate?
Yeah.
The
Oh,
the organization in Kansas City, I don't remember the name, Jason, they're not the affiliate anymore?
not that I'm aware of. Let me see if I can find that link real quick and share it.
Well, I appreciate you both volunteering to assist in that. Things always get a little crazy in the spring with the legislative session, but it's a neat opportunity that we have this data from the survey, and we were able to share it through a few presentations last year. So um, I like the idea of, even if there are things in here that we may not be able to act on as an advisory committee or as a board, we will try to do the research and understand what the data means to us, and then also share it with other partners. And so this could be a good opportunity for us to build some good connections, but also share some of the information that we've collected too.
So follow up real quick. If you go to nadac.org/Kansas, it says the Kansas affiliate of NADAC is looking for members to serve on an advisory committee to support and expand affiliate and membership activities in Kansas. If you're interested in serving, please contact NADAC's affiliates manager.
And could you provide the address for that again?
Yeah, it's I guess we don't have a chat here, but it's nadac.org/Kansas.
Okay. Yeah, the chat is turned off by design because we're broadcasting on the YouTube channel. Part of that is just to make sure that everybody viewing the channel can see what the members who are in attendance on Zoom can see. So, but I appreciate you providing that, and I will go and take a look at that. So,
Thank you.
but no, I thought overall the NADAC conference was a good experience. It was eye-opening to me. I felt like I learned things, and I got a better appreciation for the profession as well. I had a similar experience the first time I attended a behavior analyst conference, because, like I said, some of the professions have regulatory board associations that are very organized, and there's a lot of uniformity. But one of the first things when I became executive director was learning a couple of the professions that I wasn't the most familiar with, and one of those was behavior analysis. So when I was able to attend a conference for regulators in that profession, it was very helpful to kind of hear the history of the profession, the development of standards, and then also understand some of the differences. And so attending the NADAC conference was also helpful to hear from the perspective of other states, and then on a more local level, hearing from individual practitioners during some of the times in between sessions. So I will plan to attend the conference in Kansas City, and collect more information. Whether we present something, we will try to work on a submission, and if we can get that submitted before the deadline, that's great. If not, we'll try to attend that and then collect more information to bring back.
Okay. I agree. It was an interesting experience, and on a clinical level, because I hadn't been to a conference of that size, it was the first time I really had heard harm reduction spoken about as a viable treatment option, which I appreciated. I work primarily with college students, so sometimes that is something they will latch onto, not just abstinence. Okay, moving forward. Moving on to old business. Continued review and discussion of draft report of survey licenses. I think we wanted to look at two questions today and hopefully generate some discussion about the responses. The first question is question 13 on pages 26 through 28 of the report, which is in the packet that was sent out yesterday. And it's practice-related negative issues. There are responses from the LAC level, the LMAC level, and the LCAC level, if you have a moment to look those over. And if anyone had thoughts of, or there were things that were surprising or things that you expected, just wanted to maybe generate some discussion about the survey responses.
And Jill, I'll just add a comment here that I think is kind of interesting. I'll share my screen as well as we look through some of the summary information.
Thank you.
So looking first at page, let's see, page 26 of the draft survey report. That is the page that starts with that question 13 for all three levels of licensing. And it asked over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing the addiction counseling profession, could you share information on any practice-related issues you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appear to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? And one thing that struck me, I thought was interesting, if you look at the responses from the LACs, about 44 respondents indicated comments basically saying that they have experienced no practice-related negative issues, or there weren't any areas they could identify, which was a high percentage out of the total of 111 respondents. There were some that were noted as issues, and those are found on page 26. When you asked the LMAX on the bottom of page 26, 89 LMAX answered that question, and 19 respondents indicated having experienced no practice-related negative issues. So a much smaller percentage, although the ones that noticed issues, they were identified here in the section. And then for the LCACs, 159 responded to the survey, and about a third reported having seen no practice-related negative issues, though the ones that were identified are listed here. So, Lisa, I saw your hand was up. Do you have any comments or notes about this first question, question 13?
Not in this question particular, but just a general comment, and it may have absolutely no relevance to the report, but seeing diversity and harm reduction. So as you know, in the executive orders that were given out about a year ago by the president, programs that were funded by SAMHSA, and I know that the BSRB is not, were required to basically scrub any documentation, products, reports, et cetera, that contained particular words. So the only thing I would just say is not that anything needs to be changed, because obviously changing things impacts the integrity of your survey. But if this gets presented, for example, to SAMHSA representatives, I'm just thinking out loud about how we might want to be careful about presenting any information where some of those words are used that are not approved by the current administration. And that's just a comment, nothing more.
Yeah, no, good comment. And as much as possible, I think so. Some of my staff members helped summarize some of the responses to the survey, and a lot of this really comes directly from individual licensees, and so so it's not really a judgment by the BSRB. It's really more of a reflection of what licensees are saying out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just something to consider. I'm thinking if we present at NADAC, there may be SAMHSA reps from the region there. I don't know, but just for whatever it's worth.
No, I appreciate that, and I do think in terms of any recommendations or comments, that is definitely something to keep in mind. And I can tell, if you weren't able to follow all the legislative interim committees that were meeting in the fall, there was one that was specifically looking at the DEI concept to see if different groups had followed through with the legislative direction to remove some of that language and some of the references. And so it will continue to be a topic for sure. So. Any other comments or maybe things that were noted as we did kind of list here We have the summary information on pages 26 and 27, but then also we highlighted the open answer responses. So if you want to see the specific responses by individuals who completed the survey, those are found in the appendices that start on page 69. So I do feel like there's a nice balance there. We tried to summarize the information, but it's also helpful sometimes to hear the voice of the people who responded to the survey. Some of the times tone, at least in terms of wording, makes a difference. So. Well, if there's no additional comments on question 13, we can just continue to kind of look at some of this information, but we can move to the next question, and that was question 14. This was also a question that was posed to all three levels of licensing. It said, over the past 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? Please explain. And for the LACs, 110 individuals responded to the survey. The most frequent survey response is that they've experienced no issues relating to telehealth. And then some licensees mentioned their belief that telehealth is helpful and essential, especially in rural areas. But for the ones that did point out some items of concern, those are listed here. Some of those deal with issues involving technology, and then some deal with some other issues as far as being able to connect or having productive services, or maybe missing certain behaviors because of the nature of telehealth versus in-person treatments. For the LMAX 92, LMAX answered the question. 65, or roughly 2/3, indicated having experienced no issues concerning telehealth. But for the individuals who did respond with some observed negative issues, some of those dealt with the technology issues again, maybe a preference against telehealth, maybe difficulties with focus or observed behaviors again, or maybe the rapport of telehealth versus in-person. And then for the LCACs, 164 LCACs responded to the question. The most frequent survey response, 119 of the 164, was that they had not experienced negative issues involving telehealth. But then some individuals did identify some issues, primarily regarding confidentiality, maybe some issues regarding reimbursements with insurance, missing certain cues, or distractions, and also issues with documentation. So I just kind of wanted to provide a brief summary, also highlighting that the open answer responses are on those pages for this question. Those sections begin on page 83 of the report. But do you have any comments about the summary information concerning telehealth for the three levels of practitioners? It is funny. I did notice, and I don't know if it was in this survey response or if it was in something from another profession, but I did get a couple of comments from people that said, your survey seemed to have a really negative slant, because it seemed like you were asking for negative comments involving supervision and negative things involving telehealth. And part of that was by design, because we were trying to look for problems so that we could come up with solutions. But I do think it's important not to overlook, when we ask what is individuals, how their experience has been. If the information comes back that it's been positive, I think that is something that you need to make sure to note, even if we went into it looking specifically for negative issues. So I do want to not gloss over that the positive comments from people involving telehealth. But and any comments from advisory committee members concerning any of their takeaways from this topic? I can say another thing that struck me, I thought was really interesting. there was a multiple choice question on the survey that talked about what percentage of the hours of services you provide are in-person services versus remote services. And what I consistently see across the professions is the popularity of remote or telehealth services, but there has not been a complete shift for a large number of people towards all remote services. So I think overwhelmingly, a lot of practitioners have found it to be beneficial and have really positive comments, but it hasn't meant that practitioners are moving exclusively towards that. Some may have, but I think that there's still a prevalence of the in-person services when you look at how many hours people are providing services. So I think that may contrast a little to the overwhelming positive comments here about telehealth or remote services.
I had a thought, but about question 14, since my brain has been kind of mulling it over in a second. But
Mhm.
question 13 about the areas that people wanted to learn more about. And I was just thinking about some of those areas. To me, it seemed like we're kind of outside of the scope of some people's practice, or what I would have thought is that. So not question 14, but question 13. And like co-occurring or medication assisted therapy or something like that. And so I was just trying to think um, about like even for the LAC, like they asked for some of those things. And I was just thinking about, is there a discrepancy, I guess, like at the educational level of like maybe what we think that these LACs and LMACs are supposed to know versus what's being expected for them at the clinical level when they go to work? Are they expecting or being asked to do more, or are we preparing them? Or yeah, I was just mulling and thinking about that at the educational level versus like when they actually get on the job, because I know things have also changed clinically in terms of like CCBHCs and but also are they able to refer and use their resources, because some things we really can't teach them, like how people do documentation. That's literally on-site thing, but we can teach you about confidentiality, and like those things. But how each particular site does their documentation or um, different things is very specific. But I just was thinking about, yeah, wanting to do that and trying to figure out what those gaps are. But some of these things I'm thinking like, oh, medication assisted therapy or treatment we can talk to them about, but we can't, that's not their job to do that. They can't prescribe. Um, and like co-occurring, like, yes, we can teach you about some of that, but you can't diagnose, the mental health. So I just was trying to figure out I guess the undercurrent of some of these things of what people need. Like for instance, like gambling, we talked about that, like that actually takes a little bit more. Some of these are behavioral addictions that people may or may not have experienced with. We talk about, but we don't. Well, in our program, we may touch on them, but people may not have a lot of information. So I was thinking about what we teach them versus what's being asked, and are we bridging that gap? So.
Mhm. Yeah, good comments. And one of the things that we made a priority for this survey was that the responses would be anonymous. So it's hard to know on a person by person response. Um, it is possible that potentially someone who uh, filled out that particular survey response may be dually licensed by the BSRB. And so they may have received two separate surveys, and maybe they were unable to separate the addiction practice from another profession where they were able to diagnose, or maybe there is a issue of a confusion of what they should be doing under practice concerning what they're authorized to do. So it's hard to know with the level of anonymity for the survey responses. Any other comments from advisory committee members on question 13 or question 14? Well, I appreciate you, and we've had a little bit of a gap since the last meeting, but we are scheduled to meet quarterly, so the next advisory committee meeting will be coming up in March. something to be working on for that meeting as it relates to the report. A lot of the advisory committees have kind of been focusing on a couple questions per meeting. And so I think in terms of looking at questions for future meetings, what I would recommend is for the advisory committee to look at the next question for the next meeting, question 15. It says, over the past 2 years, have you experienced any negative issues involving supervision? So go ahead and plan on reading the summary responses for that question, but also the information in the appendices as far as the open field responses. And then the following question, question 16, do you currently use artificial intelligence in your practice? And if you do, in what areas do you use AI? So go ahead and look at question 15 and question 16 for the next meeting. And then we can discuss those two questions and your takeaways at the March Advisory Committee meeting.
Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda of old business, continued discussion on regulation of AI. I believe that David had some updates regarding what some other states have done recently regarding policies or laws about the use of AI in practice. Could you share those?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And so I think at the next advisory committee meeting, after we review the survey responses on artificial intelligence, we may be in a better position to talk about maybe possible recommendations to the board. But also as kind of homework for the next advisory committee meeting, I included in your packet a couple of documents I thought would be helpful as we look at what other states are doing in terms of regulation of artificial intelligence. There is a document that's about 26 pages in the packet. That the front page is titled Examples of State Regulation on the Use of Artificial Intelligence by Mental Health Practitioners. And that front page has sort of a bulleted summary of 3 different bills that were passed in 2025. There was a bill that was passed by Illinois. It is House Bill 1806. It's known as the Wellness and Oversight for Psychological Resources Act. And what it would do would ban AI-only therapy. So AI systems cannot independently perform or advertise therapy, counseling, or psychotherapy unless clearly tied to oversight by a licensed professional. It would also prohibit misleading advertising claims such as treating AI therapy, chatbot counselor, or virtual psychotherapist as misleading and unlawful unless the AI has direct clinician oversight. It would also make professional oversight required, so licensed mental health providers can use AI tools only if they review and approve any therapeutic output. AI cannot independently make decisions or interact with clients therapeutically. It allows AI for administrative and support, but only under human review. So tasks like scheduling, transcribing, or summarizing with written revocable client consent. And then it also included some language in that bill from Illinois as far as fines up to $10,000 per violation. So I want to make you aware of that bill that passed in Illinois. There was also a bill that passed in Nevada. It was AB 406, and it forbids AI systems from providing mental or behavioral health care or claiming that they can do so. Human providers can still use AI, but only for administrative functions and with independent review of any AI output. And similar to the bill passed in Illinois, there's a note in the bill as far as violation and up to $15,000 fines. And then in Utah, that is a state that has actually done quite a bit the last few years as far as regulation of AI. Their bill for 2025 was House Bill 452, and it would mandate safeguards like clear disclosure that the chatbot is AI, privacy protections prohibiting data sale, and also marketing restrictions. And it would bar AI therapy chatbots from selling or sharing user data. And then separately, I just want to call to your attention that in 2024, Utah also created an Office of AI Policy, and this is not a minor endeavor. I wanted to note there that As opposed to a small office that may have one employee, this was actually staffed by 4 individuals: a director, a head of research, a lead AI legal and policy analyst, and also a head of stakeholder outreach. And then there is another document in your packet that I provided. It's called Best Practices for the Use of Artificial Intelligence by Mental Health Therapists. So that is available for your review as well. The 26-page document that has the summary of the 3 bills on the front, the rest of that document is just a copy of those 3 bills. So if you wanted to see specifically what was in those 3 pieces of legislation, that's behind the summary page. But then that second document is the one that is the best practices for the use of AI by mental health therapists. And that came out by that Office of Artificial Intelligence Policy under the Utah Department of Commerce. And that was released back in April of 2025. So as you kind of review more information on this topic and collect ideas and prepare for the advisory committee to discuss possible recommendations, I want to give you more resources and things to take a look at between now and the next meeting. Sorry, Jill, I think you're muted.
Someday I'll get over doing that. I would like to table this agenda item until we review the survey question on the use of AI and have a little bit more time to review the information included in the packet. If that's okay with everybody. Okay, moving on to new business. Review of regulations. I am hopeful that Leslie is here to give us some more background and information about the review of these regulations.
Yeah, and before we turn it over to Leslie, I'll just go ahead and frame this topic. And then also what we're going to be asking the advisory committee members to do, because this is going to be a little bit of a different process than we generally do in meetings. But one of the reasons why we have advisory committees is to hear from each profession. And we ask advisory committee members to be knowledgeable about the statutes and the regulations for the professions. And we want to get your recommendations on possible changes so that we can forward those to the board. Ultimately, the board has the authority to make those changes or to make other changes. But there was a bill that was passed by the legislature about 3 or 4 years ago that basically put every state agency on a 5-year rotation. And every 5 years, there's different groups of agencies every year during the process, but our year is up in 2026. And in 2026, the BSRB will need to provide information to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations for every regulation under the authority of the BSRB. And we will need to basically answer questions about, is this regulation necessary for the implementation of state law? If not, is it helpful? And then explain a little bit about what the regulation does, and essentially try to justify why we have this regulation. And if we can't justify it, there is probably a good reason that we should maybe consider striking it. And so some of the regulations that we have brought before you as an advisory committee over the last few years have been more of the larger regulations, more complex. So things like unprofessional conduct, and we've talked about recommended changes to that, or perhaps the continuing education items or the documentation of continuing education, maybe the educational requirements for licensure or definitions. But there are other regulations that are more of helper regulations, that some of them are very short, but they serve a good purpose. But some of these ones, especially that were written many years ago, maybe have not become before the advisory committee in several years. So what we are asking each of the advisory committees to do is to review these as a group. And I've asked Leslie, as Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, to essentially review these regulations in advance and to look for any potential edits or changes that she thinks would be appropriate, based on making sure we have updated language, based on making sure that these are syncing with any changes in statutory law that has happened over the last few years. And so what we plan to do with you as a group is to start on the first regulation, and I'll share my screen, and then I will turn it over to Leslie and I'll say, do you have any recommended changes for this regulation? And if she does, Leslie will walk through those with the group. And then when we are ready to finish her review, then we'll open it up for questions by the advisory committee. And then we'll see if the advisory committee members have any other recommended changes for this regulation. And then if there are no additional changes or questions, we will ask if there's a consensus of the advisory committee to move the recommendation forward to the board with any recommended changes. We may come to some of these regulations where there are no recommended changes, and that's okay. We don't have to change all of these, but part of it is making sure that we're also being good stewards of the regulations. And we can at least say, as of this date, the advisory committee did put eyes on the regulation. We did verify that we do think it's important to keep this regulation. We don't think any changes are appropriate at this time. But then when we look at it in future years, we can say the advisory committee has not reviewed this regulation in 2 years. And then we can say, as of that date, the advisory committee was okay with the current language. Now we might want to make a future change. So we will just go item by item, and then we'll ask for there to be consensus at the end of each one. And if there is, we'll move it forward. If there's any items we come upon that you would like some additional time to look at or are confusing, we can also table that and then pick it up at the next meeting too. Any questions before we jump into the regulations? Okay. And Leslie, I mentioned that I would share my screen. Would you like me to share my screen, or would you like to share your screen if you have any edits on your copies of it?
I actually put the edited copies in the advisory committee meeting folder.
Okay. Then
And I added 102-7-8. That's the audit regulation.
okay.
And that's one that I had changes in, so I need to.
Okay. Well, when we get to that item, maybe we'll just ask the advisory committee if there's any objections to adding that one to the agenda, since we didn't have it listed in advance. So,
Right.
but I will go ahead and pull up the edited copy so you can all take a look at that. So the first one would be KAR 102-7-4A. And Leslie, do you have these still open on your computer?
Well, I just opened that one.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Why don't you go ahead and share your screen, and then you can walk through what you've identified as a change.
Okay. Hold on, it's still opening. My computer's running very slow. I apologize.
Okay. I think we can see it now.
There we go. So you can see it?
Yes.
Okay. It's not showing on mine, so I never know if I'm doing it right. So there's really no changes in this regulation until we get down to page 4, and that's for application for a clinical addiction counselor, excuse me. And we've been making this change for the social work as well. The other professions, if you've already been licensed as an LMAC and provided references to get the LMAC, then you don't have to do that again for the clinical license, because we get the attestation from your supervisor, which includes the same information as a reference, like about meriting the public trust and that information. So in number 3, I've said if not previously provided to the board. So if they're not licensed here, they'll have to do all the references. But if they are licensed and have submitted references in the past, they don't have to do it again for the clinical level. And then down on page 7 in capital B as in boy. I've added the words as defined in 102-7-1, and that's because extenuating circumstances has already been defined in the definition regulation. So we want to point back to that regulation rather than defining it again in another regulation. Because then if there's any changes, you got to make sure you get every regulation that's in. So we're pointing back to the definition regulation in B as in boy, and then again, number 2 on page 8, and then striking H 1 and 2, because that's the definition that we don't want in there anymore. And that is all the changes for that regulation.
Okay.
Stop sharing.
Sure. Go ahead and stop sharing. We'll just make sure if there's any questions. So are there any questions from members of the advisory committee on those recommended changes from Leslie? These are minor, but I think helpful, and they do show that we are doing our due diligence and making sure that the regulations are up to date and more easily understood by individual licensees or applicants. So are there any other recommended changes by members of the advisory committee? If not, are there any objections from the members of the advisory committee to move this forward as a recommended change to the board? And if there's no objection, is there consensus to move this forward to the board? You can just show me with nods of heads or affirmative affirmations. Okay.
Looks like there's consensus via head nod.
Okay. And Jason and Mike, I see that your hands were up, and I assume that is just support for this moving forward. Okay, so it appears there's consensus to move this regulation forward, 102-7-4A, with the recommended changes that Leslie had highlighted. So we appreciate that. We will move that forward to the board for recommended changes for the board review at the March board meeting. The next item up is regulation 102-7-4B. So I'll turn it back over to Leslie and she can share her screen and let you know if she has any recommended changes for this regulation.
Okay. So 102-7-4B is application based on reciprocity. And there were some statutory changes to that reciprocity requirements back in 23. So we have to update the regulation appropriately. The first is just adding master's addiction counselor in A and adding the statute number because it had been, the regulation had been done before the statute number had been given a number. And then if you go down to B as in boy, I'm striking language, excuse me, after certification, because we no longer have a 5-year requirement for people to practice when they do reciprocity. So that language is just being struck. And then down in 3, saying that I'm adding at least a baccalaureate degree is required for an LAC and a master's degree is required for the master's or clinical addiction counselor. Striking the beginning of, I don't want to strike 4, but striking the language in number 4 and adding language that the applicant, proof that the applicant has a license, registration, or certification with a similar scope of practice for at least the 12 months immediately prior to when they apply for reciprocity. And that is what the statutory change was. So, excuse me. I think the rest of that was all the changes I had for that.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and stop sharing your screen and we'll see, is there any questions by members of the advisory committee? Don't see any questions. Are there any other recommended changes from members of the advisory committee? If not, are there any objections to moving this recommendation forward to the board for review? Okay. So it appears that there is consensus with moving KAR 102-7-4B forward with the recommended changes highlighted by Leslie. So thank you for that. We will move this forward to the board for the board to review at the March board meeting. We'll move next to the next regulation, which is 102-7-7. And Leslie, go ahead and share your screen and let us know if you see any recommended changes for 102-7-7. Or actually,
Did we review 10274A?
yeah, I think there was another recommendation. I think the first one, 102-7-4. We'll come back to that one after 102-7-7 because I think that number 4 was listed first, but we'll circle back around to that first one.
I'm sorry if I went out of order.
That's okay.
So-
As far as 102-7-7, did you see any updates or changes?
Yeah, just adding instead of late renew, striking that language and adding the word reinstate and reinstatement to make it more clear. And then in number 2, adding if the license has been expired for 1 year or less, that they have to pay the penalty fee. If it's been expired longer, they do not. That was all the changes in that one.
Okay. Any questions on the recommended changes for KAR 102-7-7? Okay. Are there any further recommended changes for members of the advisory committee? If not, is there any objection from any members as far as moving this recommendation forward to the board for consideration? Okay, seeing no objections, it appears to be by consensus that 102-7-7 will move forward. So thank you for that. And then Leslie, let's go ahead and look back on the agenda. The first regulation that we had highlighted here was 102-7-4 application for licensure. I didn't know if you had a chance to look at that regulation for the meeting.
I did. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Okay. It's 102-7-4. I put an A after it, but it doesn't have an A.
Looks like there's two different.
The A and B. Huh?
And Leslie, I think there's two different ones. There's 102-7-4, and then there's 102-7-4A.
Right. And that's what I mean. I put the A on this one when it's actually the one that says B. On the other professions, it's A and B. On this one, it's just no A. And then the second one is reciprocity is A in addiction counseling. And 102-7-4 is the application, just a standard application.
Okay.
So let me and that's the one I did first that talked about not having to do references for the clinical level.
Okay. So the first regulation.
Yeah, I did it. I just had titled it incorrectly. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't we go back to that one just for clarity?
Okay. And of course, it opens wrong every time. So okay, so in this, it's 102-7-4, it's application, standard applications. And excuse me. Down on page 4, if I added, if not previously provided to the board, that they would submit two professional references for the LCAC application. And other professions are not required to do this, so we're just bringing you along with the other professions. And then adding as under extenuating circumstances, adding as defined in KR 102-7-1 and in two places, and then striking section H numbers 1 and 2 because extenuating circumstances doesn't need to be defined in this regulation.
Okay. So this is one that the advisory committee had already looked at and had already approved these recommended changes. But just for the clarity for the minutes, that would be KAR 102-7-4, even though when we talked about it, we had it listed as 4A. So I think the advisory committee has recommended changes to 102-7-4, 102-7-4B, and then 102-7-7, which was the renewal regulation. So Leslie, did you have the opportunity to look at 102-7-4A, the licensure without examination, the grandparenting?
No, I apologize. That actually should have been repealed. So if it has not, if it's still on the Secretary of State's website, then we need to repeal that regulation.
Okay. Yes, that is still listed, 102-7-4A, licensure without examination. I'll go ahead and share my screen here just so we can kind of take a look at that. Okay, so you should be seeing a copy of KAR 102-4 or 102-7-4A, licensure without examination. This regulation, if you go to the bottom of any regulation, you can see when it was made effective or when it was last modified. So for this regulation, there's been no change since 2012. That's when it became effective. And actually, the change occurred the year before, which was in 2011. Leslie, could you mentioned this one, you'd recommend that it just be struck, and could you kind of explain a little bit about what this regulation is and then why you recommend that it be struck?
Yes, so this regulation was for applicants who were grandfathered in. And it was the application requirements for that. And the language to be grandfathered in has been removed from statute. So we no longer use this regulation, and it needs to be repealed.
I'll stop sharing my screen. I appreciate the clarification on that. And this is one of the reasons why Leslie is so good at what she does, because she has been employed by the board since 1999. So she has seen the history of the professions and a lot of these changes, and historical knowledge is invaluable. So thank you, Leslie. So just as a recommendation, what we'd be asking for on this one is, since that regulation no longer is needed, it would be a recommended change to just go ahead and strike that regulation entirely. So do you have any questions about that recommended change? I would say, are there further recommended changes? But if it goes away entirely, there's really nothing else to edit on that. Are there any objections from members of the advisory committee to moving that forward? Okay, then there appears to be consensus to go ahead and move forward the recommendation that 102-7-4A be struck. So we will move that forward to the board for their review. And Leslie, I believe there was also KAR 102-7-5 that's listed on the agenda under examination for addiction counselor or clinical addiction counselor. Did you get an opportunity to look at 102-7-5?
I did, and I had no recommended changes.
Okay. I'll go ahead and just kind of pull that regulation up for the members of the advisory committee so you can just kind of see that regulation. Okay, this is KAR 102-7-5, examination for addiction counselor, master's addiction counselor, or clinical addiction counselor. So there is information in here about those topics for the different levels of licensure. This one was actually one that was recently changed. So it was amended in June of 2024. So, but as Leslie said, she doesn't have any further recommended changes. Any questions from members of the advisory committee about 102-7-5? If there's no questions, are there any recommended changes from members of the advisory committee? If there's no recommended changes, is it the consensus of the advisory committee that we will just make a note in the minutes that this regulation was reviewed? There's no recommended changes at this time from the advisory committee? Okay, there appears to be consensus on that note, so we will just record that in the minutes so that if there's ever a question of has the advisory committee reviewed this for updates, this was the date and time that it took place. So thank you for that. And then I believe there is one more, and that would be KAR 102-7-12. And Leslie, did you want to go ahead and share your screen and just kind of discuss that regulation?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's open.
Okay, so this is the designation for the referral source for the DSM. And we already have the 5th edition, but we need to add text revision because there is a newly printed book. So we need to update it to the most current copy being used by licensees.
Thank you, Leslie.
And that's the only change.
And this is a consistent change across the professions when they reference the DSM. So this is something we'd be essentially submitting for everyone altogether. Some of the other advisory committees have asked, would it just be appropriate to make more general language in the regulation that we would always attach to the most current version of the DSM so it wouldn't need to be updated? And I think from what I have heard and seen from some past legislative committees is that this is one of those topics they would prefer to have some level of oversight, at least in terms of knowing whether or not there's going to be a decision to identify and recognize a certain version of the DSM. At times, there have been changes in terms of what is classified as an impairment under the DSM. And at times, some of that discussion has gotten political in terms of what I have heard. And so I think just in terms of whether or not that would want to be something where we would identify just the most current version, I think this is something where the legislature would like to at least have a conversation in any instance where we would want to follow a certain version of the DSM. And also, the majority of the time, the legislature tends to be opposed to deferring to a third party because it does give up some of the sovereignty of the state and our ability to make decisions independently. And so making a decision to follow a certain version, we have a little more control than if we say we will go along with whatever a third party group might recognize in the future. So just kind of wanted to share some of what I've seen and listened to from some past committees and let you know why we're asking for a one-time change to this right now. And then we will probably bring it back if there are future changes to the DSM in the future. So, any questions from advisory committee members on this recommended change to KAR 102-7-12? Okay. Are there any further recommended changes by members of the advisory committee? If not, are there any opposition to going ahead and forward this recommended change to the board? Okay. It appears that there is consensus by the advisory committee to forward this recommended change to the board. So appreciate your time on that. I know that process is tedious to go through each one of these regulations and just kind of identify any edits, but I want to thank you for your work on this. Sometimes the legislature is rightfully concerned whether agencies are being good stewards of the regulations to make sure they're making sure that they link to the most current version of the statutes. And so we want to make sure that we can say we are doing our part to be good stewards of that process, and appreciate all of you for taking part in that process too. So we will forward these to the board, and I will provide updates to you when the board gets a chance to review these, if they have any questions for the advisory committee, or if they do something different than what was recommended.
Thanks to Leslie too.
Absolutely. Yes.
You're very welcome. Babe, can we add the 102-7-8?
Yes, actually. And the agenda for the meeting does mention that we can all times and items are subject to change. So if there's no objection from members of the advisory committee, we can add that as a regulation for review today as well. So any objection from advisory committee members to going ahead and adding that regulation for review as well? Okay, appear that there's no objection. So let's go ahead and add the review of that regulation. And Leslie, which regulation was that?
102-7-8.
Okay.
It's the audit regulation. And I figured it would be easiest to do if we could do it now, because then it can go as a group when we go in front of the committees.
Okay.
So the changes in this is in number 2, we're striking the original copies of the original documents for continuing education. We don't require that. We would prefer copies and let you keep your originals. We've had instances where people sent their originals and we never received them. So this way they can also be sent digitally. And then we're adding language. So if someone has an account with CE Broker, we don't want to use CE Broker in our regulations, but we're adding language that allows you to upload them to a program approved by the board. And then instead of sending us all the information for the audit, our renewal specialist just goes into the program and reviews the documents and approves your audit that way. And those are the only 2 changes for that regulation.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Any questions
Mm-hmm.
from the advisory committee? Any other recommended changes? Okay, is there any objection to moving this regulation forward to the board? Okay, it appears to be consensus that we'll move that regulation forward as well. So we'll include that with the packet that the board will review at the March meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you guys very much.
Yesterday at the board meeting, Leslie had done this for all the other disciplines, but ours, because we hadn't met yet, it was a lot of work. So you are truly a treasure for the BSRB.
Thank you. I enjoy this kind of stuff. Everyone else is like, ew. But I think it's kind of fun to do. And I appreciate that everyone stays awake through my presentations. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, moving on to the next item on the new business agenda, discussion for making up practicum hours for license. My understanding, and David can help me with this, is that if someone is applying for licensure and their practicum doesn't include enough hours that the licensure requirements require, they can be allowed to make up those practicum hours on the job. My question was about, maybe for Leslie, was about what would their licensure status need to be during that time? Would it be temporary?
And I think what we talked about was there is a path for someone to request a provisional license.
Okay.
And then be able to make up that if the board approves them to do a provisional license, but it's sort of an extra step. And so for some of the other professions like marriage and family therapy, they basically changed some language to add that as something that could be done with a traditional temporary license to make up some of the practicum hours. And so I think, we at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about that there is a path to request a provisional license, but we were curious if the advisory committee would be supportive of moving to a direction of allowing those to be made up during a temporary license. And I think there was support for that. But Leslie, I am curious, as far as that type of a change, is that something that could be done through regulations, or would there need to be a statutory change for the addiction counseling profession? And you're currently muted, Leslie.
See, Jill, you're not alone. I apologize. I'm looking at the statute and I don't believe the statute does not include the number for client contact hours in the practicum. So it would be a regulation change. So it would be adding it to the regulation that they could have this many hours or make up the deficit under a temporary license or something like
that. Okay.
Is this something the advisory committee needs to make a recommendation to the board?
I think with that clarification, yes, I would say this would be helpful if the advisory committee could make a recommendation that they would like the language of the regulation changed to allow that to be made up through a temporary license.
Okay. Is there any further discussion or questions about that? Okay. Is this something that needs a vote?
Sure, there could be a vote.
Okay. All those in.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a question to be clear? So are you wanting them to have, so there's two different routes you could go. One is that they have to have a practicum, and if they don't have that many hours, I think it's 300 or 400 total for LACs and 300 direct client contact for clinical and master's level. But so one would be that they had a practicum but just don't have enough hours. Another would be if they didn't have a practicum, because master's level psychologists have an option if they did not have a practicum. We need to, I guess, set the low bar. If you want them to at least have had a practicum, then we can say a practicum with this many hours or additional hours accrued under a temporary license. That would be my recommendation for the regulation at this time.
But there is a possibility that if they didn't have a practicum, including direct service at all, they still could accrue those hours under a temporary license.
If that's what you would like, yes. I think we would have to put it through and have legal look at it. Because the AG's office, looks at the legality of it. So, but it's not in statute, so I can't find a reason why it wouldn't work.
What my thought was that if we are facing staffing shortages across the state, then if somebody wants to get into this work but didn't do a practicum, perhaps we should give them an avenue to do that. But I don't know what y'all think.
I agree with you.
So Leslie, would that be essentially putting no minimum hour or practicum requirement hours on it?
It would be where I would change, I think, the language saying that they have to have 2 practicum courses or additional post-degree hours for licensure, instead of saying the number of hours. So the practicum would be a practicum of at least 400 hours or a post-degree accrual of at least 400 hours, something to that effect, so that then they would not, that's where I'm questioning how I'd have to look at it. So if you're okay with it, I can look at the regulation and go ahead and amend it and bring it back to you at your next meeting. Because it would be your education regulation, which I think needs a lot of updating anyway. Because it was written very detailed and your profession does not have very strong addiction counseling programs, which I wasn't aware of at the time. So it could use a lot of updating. So I'll go ahead and include that language and we'll go from there. That's okay with you.
But I would say Washburn is the educational program, then that is the strongest. And so I would have to object to the non-practicums because that would render our educational program obsolete. Because then people could just get their education somewhere else instead of coming to Washburn.
I mean, I think they need to have options for education,
right.
not just Washburn.
Right. And that's fine. But in terms of getting a Kansas license, in terms of being able to have the requirements for Kansas, I'm okay with the first option in terms of like if they were able to get it from somewhere else and they didn't meet all the practicum requirements because that's a bit more, I don't know, like not necessarily common, but I've definitely seen that in terms of those options where maybe they've had 200 hours, 300 hours or something like that. And we're, in terms of them coming to Kansas or whatever they might need to do. But in terms of the practicums, if they don't have practicums and they're coming from another program, that's a little bit confusing to me in terms of like, I'm not sure what kind of program that would look like if they're trying to do an addictions counseling one. I would have, because again, like it would change so much in the educational requirements, the licensing requirements, that just seems like a bit of a larger change than just making up hours. That's a different thing. Those are, because practicums for us are actually courses and not just making up hours. So that's an educational change. So that's different. So again, so I'm fine with what was changed, what was saying before, which is making up practicum hours, which is what that is, which is completing them. But then you're saying changing it to making up entire practicums, and that's not something I can agree to.
Maybe we need to, like you were saying, look at all of the education piece together as a whole instead of trying to tease out these pieces because one piece may impact the other. But if we look at all of it together, and ultimately it needs to be what's best for, the public and not a particular educational program.
Absolutely, because it also it means making sure that the people that we are entering into the program, that they are standardized, that we are making sure that we're providing them with supervision, the correct type of supervision, that people are trained well and not just allowing any just warm bodies into the profession either.
Leslie, is this something that you could review the educational requirements and we can bring it back for an agenda item next time?
Yes, and I'll mark up a reg and bring it back.
Okay.
Well,
is that acceptable to everyone? Okay. Okay, and we have about 5 minutes. The last item on the agenda, discussion on possible alternative pathways for licensure. This has been on the agenda for a while, and I realize that there can be very strong feelings about folks that have been been working in the field for a long time, but may not have a bachelor's degree or may not meet the requirements for licensure. I just wanted to hear from advisory committee members about your thoughts on it and if there is a way to standardize. Oh gosh, I got feedback. Standardize a way to look at experience versus formal education. And I'm not really certain that there is, but that's my opinion. David, do you have thoughts or recommendations?
Well, I can just say that this is a topic that was not necessarily specific to this profession. This was something that was forwarded by the chair of the board for each of the advisory committees to discuss. And I think some of the advisory committees have talked about some different options. Other ones have said, you know, we've had a conversation on this topic. We don't have any recommendations. So if there are recommendations from the advisory committee, those could be things that could be forwarded back to the board. Alternatively, it would be perfectly fine too if there's no recommendations in this area. We can say that the advisory committee had the opportunity to revisit this conversation, and there's no recommendations at this time. So either one is fine, honestly.
Does anyone have thoughts about this? Or at this time is our stance that we don't have any recommendations? Okay.
I don't know how we would do it, but because of that variation that you guys talked about at the very beginning across states, I have had folks come to the program who've, you know, they've been licensed at the top or certified at the top level, say in Colorado for 20 years, and they moved to Kansas. And I had to tell them, you gotta go get a bachelor's degree, man. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense, but I know we have to draw a line somewhere. I'm not sure how we make experience equivalencies. That would be the thing we would have to figure out. And Zenobia, I know we do that with credit hours. Some classes can do life experience kinds of things, but I know that's a very individualized kind of process, at least where I'm at.
As a step forward, potentially what we could offer to do for the BSRB, I know Leslie has had applicants from a number of different states that have come from, you know, other authorizations to practice in this area of addiction. Perhaps what we could do is we could collect a little information on what are the requirements in different states and bring that back at least as a way of educating the advisory committee members as far as what's required in different states. And then I'm not sure if a recommendation would come from that, but at least it would help add more information and we could learn a little bit about you know, standardizing things in different states by kind of comparing what Kansas has to some of those other states. So would you be interested if we collected information and brought it back in terms of some of the requirements in other states?
Sure.
I see head nods. It looks like folks would be interested in learning about that.
Okay.
And kind of just to address what Michael was saying, I think what you're saying, Michael, is that at our university, we do have something that's similar to that. We just had recently passed, which was like our general education degree or general studies degree, where
Right.
people can use experience to kind of do some credit hours. So that might be something to kind of look into. So that is a thought. So that's a good thought. Yeah.
Okay.
But how that would relate to a license, that would be, you know, something interesting too. So yeah, that's a good.
Absolutely.
I have a hard stop at noon, so I've got to jump off. But,
Okay.
thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jason. Okay, it is noon. If are there any other questions or comments for today? I appreciate all of your time and your energy. Could someone make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Our next meeting will be in March. David, can you send out a doodle poll?
Yes, I'll send out a poll to find availability and then we'll get that on the schedule.
Okay, all those in favor of adjourning the meeting today, say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Again, thank you and have a great rest of your January.
Okay, thank you, everyone.